All right. Well, first of all, thank you, Eric, for inviting us to come and play at your house, even if it is on a video recording that you can turn off when, we go too far, We are going to be talking about, well, first of all, who are we? I am David Weber, and this is Jacob Holo.
Hello.
Yeah. And we are collaborating on a series that you may have heard of. If you haven't, we are deeply, deeply hurt and disappointed. No guilt trip. No guilt trip. It's all right with us. Anyway, the first novel is already out. It's the Gordian Protocol, and the second one is scheduled for
October 6th.
October the 6th, my daughter's birthday.
Cool.
Yes,
I didn't know that.
Yes, it is. It's the twins' birthday, so it's their assigned birthday. We're not they're adopted. We're not absolutely positive what their actual birthday was. But I'm actually going to be home for this one. Okay,
cool.
That's cool. Yeah, I missed about 5 of their birthdays when they were younger on signing tours. And I was like, the last time that they got ready to send me on one in October, I said, nope. They said, but? I said, nope. They said, what about the second week in October? I said, we can work on that. Yeah. Anyway, the Gordian universe has some resonances with 1632. It's time travel. Unlike 1632, our poor protagonist didn't get zapped back into 1632 and couldn't go anywhere. Unlike 1632, somebody, I will name no names in this writing partnership, likes to blow up universes.
David, we talked about this, and I've promised for 2 whole books I will not blow up any more universes.
Well, that's good. I'm glad. I think of you as Conan the Destroyer, kind of thing. But
it solves so many problems
for some people. So obviously, it's kind of a different take on time travel from 1632, but it also deals with alternate universes as a consequence of historical changes.
Multiverse setting, branching timelines.
Yes, and our guys wind up able in the 30th century to travel back and forth between multiple universes once they figure out they exist. Whereas, of course, the 1632 universe, you guys are basically rebuilding the past into a different future. I don't think Eric has ever established whether or not he's building an alternate universe here or changing ours. I don't know what he's done with the paradoxes of time travel. But anyway, so Eric has asked us to talk a little bit about how we collaborate, which, given the extent of the 1632 shared universe, it's, I think, maybe the biggest shared universe in the history of science fiction.
Biggest I know of.
Yeah, looking at numbers of authors and everything, and storylines. It's really, 1632 is really a remarkable accomplishment. I think it owes a lot to Eric's ability to relinquish control in a lot of ways. Now, I'm not saying that he's relinquished control of the universe. What I'm saying is that he's relinquished creative control in a way that is very difficult for most writers to contemplate doing. We tend to be pretty, ornery is probably not the right word, but we wouldn't be writers if we didn't want to create and control our storylines.
Particular about how we want certain things portrayed?
Yeah, I would say that's fair. Why? Did you have some experience with that?
Oh, maybe.
Well, all right. I'm doing a lot of collaborations recently. recently, as in the last few years. And there are several reasons for that. The biggest one is that I have seen several writers who I think are very good, but who are at early stages in their career.
Like me.
Be like you.
Lucky me.
Well, yes. But I've been doing this for 30 years now. And over 30 years, you acquire a skill set and a degree of experience that only 30 years can build. But if I can pass on some of the lessons learned, and if I can assist someone who I think shows real promise as a storyteller, I think that's one of the things I should be doing right now. And it also, that's the altruistic side. Okay, I mentioned it first because it always looks better on your resume if you talk about the altruistic side first. Okay. The non-altruistic side of it is that there are stories and storylines that I've wanted to do for forever that I'm just plain not going to be able to do on my own, or that I think injecting another quality writer into might cause to go in ways that they wouldn't go if I was doing them solo.
We have no experience with that, do we?
Not at all. In the course of the Gordian protocols, I invited someone who had sworn he would never do a time travel story to do
true.
a time travel story.
True.
And Jacob said, okay, and I'm really glad that I did, because our areas of expertise complement each other so well.
Well, I look at it as the peanut butter and chocolate combination. Two tastes that go great together.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's fair. You might not have noticed this unless you've read some of my earlier books, but I'm essentially a historian by training. And more into I guess you would say the soft sciences, in terms of, I regard history as the greatest novel ever written. And one of the reasons that I study it the way that I do is because I'm fascinated by how it works out. Okay, it's also because unless you study your past, you have no idea where you are or where you're headed. I think we are seeing Tucson of that going on these days. Jacob, however,
I have a very different background.
Tell them about your background.
So I have a degree in electrical and controls engineering. I was a project engineer for a number of years. I was a project manager for a number of years. My current position is called a controls specialist. I deal with a lot of...
Is that like specialist? Is that another word for freak? Control?
Control in terms of industrial control systems.
I see. Okay.
Primarily in the automotive manufacturing industry. Actually, what I deal with most nowadays is database, big data analytics, creating intelligent reports, working with databases like Oracle and
all that stuff us historians do.
Yeah. So we get into the hard science aspect of the collaboration, and I'm just like right smack in my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And we get into the alternate history portion, and I'm like, David, what am I supposed to do here? Who are these people? Why are they doing this?
Who's this guy Narcissus? I have no idea what he's doing right around here.
Who is Narcissus? I get Belisarius, but who's this other guy?
Well, the fun thing was that I actually pitched the idea for this series to Bain Books in the same letter that I pitched the Honor Harrington series to Bain Books. And Jim Bain, for reasons that made perfectly good sense, opted for Honor Harrington. And, given how disastrous that choice was, I don't know what he was thinking. But
just a little bit of sarcasm there, David.
Anyway.
Was it 17 books in that series?
Well, it depends on whether you're counting what they call the mainstream novels or all of them, Anyway. But the
a long-running, diverse, well-received series.
Okay, thank you. And the $5 will be waiting when we're done. But the problem was that Honor and the other stuff that I was doing used up so much of my time that this is one of the storylines that I thought that I would never, ever be able to get to. I'm actually working currently, this series, Safe Hold, both of those were basically pitched at the same time as Honor Harrington. Okay, the concepts for them. So I tell people I haven't had a new series idea in 30 years. But anyway.
Well, you've had a backlog that you've had.
Yeah, that's the problem. So here was this story that I had really wanted to write. And the clock was ticking, okay, and I wasn't going to get it written. I mean, clearly. I have an entire historical novel series plotted out that starts with the American Revolution and goes through the Gulf War. That's actual real world history that I'm never ever going to get written because I'm going to run out of time and people won't let me stop writing science fiction to write historical fiction. By people I mean publishers, not not like my wife would shoot me if I did it, although she might. Anyway, so I'd sort of given up on this idea. And then Sharon and I got to know Jacob and his wife Heather, and he had at that point he had 4 indies.
At that point in time, it was
Dragons of Jupiter out there.
Dragons of Jupiter was the actually chronologically the second to the last, second to the latest one.
Yeah.
And we kind of went backwards to.
Yeah.
It's like, well, we put out the Dragons of Jupiter, and that as far as like an indie novel that was well received. So I've got these other things that have the big stompy robots. Which honestly were novels that I wrote for myself, to be perfectly honest.
Well, I've often said that most of the successful writers that I know would write whether they were selling it or not. That they would write because that's what they do for relaxation or to.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. So anyway, I looked at a couple of Jacob's independent novels, and I thought, this is the guy who might be able to help me get this storyline written, and if at the same time I can get him into more traditional publishing with the support structure that indie publishers don't have, that this would be like what we call a win-win situation. And it actually worked out even better than I had anticipated, in part because of the different elements that we bring to the template. I had a very strong notion about how I needed 2 competing 30th century societies. Although we only ever actually saw one of them on screen very much because our hero was cut off from his kind of thing. But we needed 2, and they needed to have different attitudes, different not so much value structures as differences in experiential background that made them significantly different from one another. And so I explained what I needed them to be and said, Jacob, go build me some societies.
So the way that I approach that is that David had sort of laid out the like outer framework for these two societies, and it's like, okay, fill in the details. Add some this is essentially what these two societies need to accomplish in terms of the story.
And I very, very much wanted, and I think we succeeded here, I very much wanted to avoid giving him a paint by numbers outline. This is what I need you to fill in it and just make the technology work for me. Because what I wanted him to do was to have a free hand to build the technology the way that seemed best to you.
And, I dove right in. I was kind of, I think, fearless, in the initial work. And I was fearless, but I was also expecting a certain response. And this response was, okay, Jacob, some things I like here. However, I think we need to tone down the crazy. Yeah. But you let me keep everything, David.
Well, you were giving me a 6'6" Viking avatar for an electronic person. What was not to like there? I mean, I wonder who had horns on his helmet expressly so that he could see whether or not people actually knew their history when they told him Viking helmets didn't have horns. I mean, and also, I needed, for the story concept to work, certain things had to happen in the process of time travel. How it was managed, how it impacted the past or didn't, as the case may be. And Jacob and I discussed those in some detail. And then he went away, and at one point, I think I had an email from him that had 3 possible theories about how we might do this, depending on how many dimensions I wanted to have. And I was like, Jacob, just make it work. Okay, you're the one pushing the wind through the trombone. I'm gonna.
I still remember. The one lunch meeting that we had, and I was kind of going over with you the first version, which it needed some work, and I'm explaining the concepts here, and you kind of did this, and then a little bit later you went, and I'm like, oh no, I am in so much trouble. I just blew David Weber's mind.
He was like, too much?
I'm like, okay, let me take this back. Let me work on it a bit. Let me streamline it. And the underlying skeleton of that initial draft did make it into the novel.
Oh, absolutely.
However, in terms of how it is communicated to the reader, I think is much better, much cleaner.
Well, the problem when you get into something like this, and it's a problem whether you're doing it solo or whether you're doing it in a partnership, and sometimes doing it in a collaborative partnership actually is the better way to go, is you need to test your own concept for continuity problems, for internal consistency. And you have to be able to explain what you believe are the essential components of it to another person in writing when you can't watch their expression and they're going, and I think that the story conferences that we've had have helped. I think they've helped there, and also when we're deciding which historical elements to incorporate and which to leave out.
Well, I remember when we were talking about the Valkyrie Protocol, Book 2, and we had a initial concept for the conflict that would happen within the true present, within the 30th century, and we're talking about an event in the past to utilize as a branch in the timeline, and your initial suggestion was to use Siskov's near miss.
Yeah.
And which frankly, from my skill set, I would have been more comfortable writing.
Yeah.
But I'm like, well, I think we should go back further and bring in more of the alternate history.
We do have to do the near miss, though. We've got to. We've got to, because I've got to get the pinballs in there.
I know you want that joke. I know.
It's got to go sooner or later. Either that, or he has to still be alive. Okay, I'm just saying.
But then we ended up with the plague of Justinian and all that richness.
Yeah.
In book 2, which me alone I could not do.
Well, I do think that one of the joys of doing time travel is the fact that you get to dive into that novel that nobody could have written that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that works here. Now, I, as some of you may know, gave myself a concussion about 3-4 years ago down in Atlanta at Dragon Con. And I am still dealing with some of the consequences of that. But one of the consequences was that virtually the entire initial draft of Valkyrie got dumped on Jacob. And when I was editing and commenting on it, I was still kind of a half step back from fully engaged, kind of warp speed. And it took Tony Weisskopf to poke me into looking at the historical sections of the book, which are not Jacob's strong suit, and which I think it was because I knew the history myself, that I was filling in my own mind what hadn't been explicitly filled in for the reader and the non-historian in the book. It's one of the reasons you should never proofread your own manuscripts, because you know what they're supposed to say. So when you get there, you assume that's what you said, okay, kind of thing. And so Tony said, the point that she brought up was one of the characters in the book is Samuel Pepys. And she said she wanted Pepys to sound more like a 17th century Englishman than he did in the initial draft. Well, Jacob doesn't do 17th century English. It's not his thing. They're kind of like,
this is not one of my strengths.
They don't want you to write reports from Oracle in 17th century English. They prefer it in like 20th century English, at least. So when I started looking at that, I went back and I also started looking at the portion of the book that takes place in the 5th century with Justinian.
Which, when I had done that section, my goal was to provide essentially a foundation for you
which you did.
To build upon.
Which you did very well, but which I had failed to build upon in the original submission draft. So I went back and... what I did is now one of my favorite things I have done in quite some time. And I think it adds a lot, not simply to the novel, but to one of the primary characters in the novel. I'm thinking about Theodora, because of the additional insight into her that you gain from watching her interact with the 5th century. One of the big themes of this book is the price of redemption. What are you willing to pay to redeem what you've done?
Some people are apparently willing to pay a lot.
Yeah,
according to our book.
Yeah. Well, and I think too that one of the other things that it looks at is unintended consequences probably isn't the right, because the thing is that we have characters who take an absolutely insane risk in the name of redemption, and it would have worked.
It almost did.
It almost did. It would have worked if not for... Well, we won't.
Nope. No, we can't give that away.
Can't give that away. No. But Jacob and I are a lot on the same page, and I think this is important in a collaboration. We're a lot on the same page in our sympathy for human beings, for our understanding of that very few people are the villains in their own stories, and very few people set out to be villains, and bad stuff happens anyway. And there are people who are just. Then we have one in this book. Who is scum of the earth? It's
normally when I come to the point in a novel where going to kill off the villain. Normally, I'm a bit sad, because I've enjoyed writing this character, even though the character's the antagonist and whatnot. But a lot of times when I'm working on an antagonist, they're not the villain from their own perspective.
Well, he's not.
But this time, I think I cackled. Yeah. I was so happy to kill off that character.
You had this coming, and somewhere in some literary universe, but I'm only what you made me. It's kind of like I never want to meet Honor Harrington in a dark alley one night, because she's going to say, "This is from Paul Zap." That's right.
Good riddance to this character.
Yeah, well, he had it coming.
Yeah.
And I think, we've never actually discussed this, but I think we are probably both in agreement that the essential ingredient in a genuine villain, not an antagonist, but a genuine villain, is lack of empathy. The inability to think of other human beings as important. Or the ability to totally subordinate the importance of other human beings to your own desires and wishes. And I've explored that in quite a few books. And that's really part of what's going on here. Now, one of the things that I thought was the most interesting aspect of the Valkyrie Protocol is the different take that it gives us on the villains from the Gordian Protocol. Because they're really, in a lot of ways, the same people.
They are.
Yeah.
And they were just trying to kill the hero.
Yeah, and actually, when you go back and you look at it, the chief baddie from the last book, initially was trying to be merciful by his own lights while protecting his own existence and that of his family and everybody that he knew and loved. The thing that I think is moving forward, and that we may see more explicitly stated in a still later book, is the degree to which the guy who was trying to prevent them from saving 15 universes from destruction in the first book, the same person in a universe that wasn't destroyed, the same person he was right up to the instant that Raybert contacted him and said, "We have to destroy your universe to save 15 others," and he said, "I don't think so," kind of thing. That guy in the ongoing post Valkyrie universe is going to look back at the actions of his doppelganger with more and more horror that he could have done that in any iteration of himself. And that's another, I think, interesting element in this story. I thought that the scene where he confronts Klaus Wilhelm and gets hit square between the eyes with what his other iterations, actions led to in Klaus Wilhelm's life. I think that's one of the more powerful scenes in the novel.
And speaking of stories related to collaboration, the character that I wasn't supposed to kill off.
Oh yes. Yes, 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 yes. That Eric had, not Eric, I'm sorry, this is for Eric. This is about Jacob. Jacob had written a scene in which he killed a character who I had intended, actually, he killed 3 characters who I had intended, well, all. You killed them all. I was, I was planning on their surviving,
Yep.
and nope, they were dead. And I was like, oh crap, I'm gonna have to make him change that. And I said, wait, I can work with this.
You made it even worse.
I made it even worse,
or better, depending on your perspective.
Yeah, well, whatever works. Yeah, but it became a critical element in who Klaus Wilhelm is and who he will be going forward. And that happens in good writing. In good writing, or in ours, as the case may be, a character doesn't go where you automatically thought they were going to go.
Well, when I was, coming to that point in your outline, and you had done the initial detailed outline for the Gordian protocol. I'm looking at, okay, I need to get Klaus Wilhelm onto the time machine, onto the hero's time machine. We're ramping up. I need to,
I was just going to send her and the kids along. That's what I was going to do. I'm just saying.
Well, and then I looked at your notes, and I didn't see anything about those characters, and then I looked at the detailed background, and I saw that the character didn't the characters didn't have any names. So I'm like, okay, well he must not have a plan for them. So Given my tendencies, which I think we touched on earlier.
Yes. I never met a universe you didn't want to kill. Yeah.
I blew up the problem.
People talk about the number of characters that I kill. Okay. And somebody actually said to me when I told them I would be collaborating on this novel with somebody else, I said, well, maybe they can limit the death toll. And I was like, oh, you fool. He likes to blow up whole universes.
Problem solver. Yeah. This is how I approach the situation.
Get a bigger hammer.
Sometimes a bigger hammer solves the problem quickly. And I've promised, David.
Yes, I know. I'm going to be keeping an eye on you. Let me just say. Well, see, I had originally envisioned this series as being more of a police organization going forward. And for those of you who have read H. Bean Piper's Paratime short fiction, and Lord Calvin, I think, is probably the Lord Calvin of Otherwhen is probably his, I think it's the only novel he actually wrote in that universe. And he didn't originally write it for that universe, but John Campbell told him he didn't believe in parallel evolution. And so instead of another planet, he moved it into a different universe, and it worked just fine. But anyway, I always loved Piper's Paracops and the concept of an organization that knew about multiple realities and was responsible for policing them, or at least interacting with them, always appealed to me. Now, in Piper's stories, the whole function of the Paracops are to keep anybody else from figuring out how to travel between universes, because their civilization has established itself as a multi-universe, multi-reality society. And that aspect of the books that really was central to making the Paracops work, but it wasn't what I was interested in terms of alternate realities. I was more interested in an organization that would protect other universes from exploitation and would look at criminal organizations that were trying to take advantage of alternate universes, and would also give me a platform to deal with alternate histories, alternate universes. And that's still baked into the DNA of the series. But the nature of the problem facing our heroes in the first book was such that it led inevitably to a different focus, at least to begin with, in the Gordian division, which is the police division created after the folks of Cisco, one of our 30th centuries, realizes that time travel really can change the past. Not your past, but it can split off a divergent child universe, and that there are potential consequences to this that they never understood because they didn't believe they could do it. They had empirical proof that they couldn't do it, but that was because their theory of everything didn't actually account for everything.
Theory of almost everything.
Yes. But they had demonstrated to their satisfaction that they couldn't change the past because they could go back, they could interact with it, they could go back to the very same moment and nothing had changed. What they didn't realize was that if there had been a change, if they'd induced something of sufficient magnitude to create a change, that change was ongoing in a universe that they no longer had access to because they hadn't worked out the math and the physics for having access to it. And so when they realized that, yes, you can do this, the Gordian division is formed specifically to put a lid on this crap before they figure out how to not blow up multiple universes.
Sorry.
And so that, but that was inevitable in the assumptions that I had for the first novel, for how it was created. I just hadn't worked my way through to the fact that that was going to have to be a primary, if not the primary focus of whatever agency was formed, because I was interested in this other side of it, and I hadn't really looked at that part of it. And that probably would have happened if I'd done it as a solo novel. I think that it happened better because I was doing it as a collaborative novel, and I think Jacob saw that as an inevitable consequence of it from the beginning, and that was baked into his approach to the writing that he did. Now, the sequel to the Valkyrie Protocol is going to be a sequel only in the sense that it is the next book in the series. It is actually going to go more back to the kind of the police procedural thing that I had in mind from the beginning. And we're probably going to be looking at ongoing from this point, not really divergent threads, but there's going to be, well, actually, maybe that's a good way to look at it. One of them is one thrust that we're going to be following is going to be more of the police activity of the Gordian division. And then we're going to do another one in which we are going to have more direct threats to universal integrity or military confrontations as opposed to police situations. There is, for example, there's nothing to prevent, now I'm not saying this is going to happen, there is nothing to prevent some rogue would-be Napoleon from going back to the 5th century quietly without anybody noticing him and splitting off a universe where he transplants 30th century technology in toto to the 5th century and then spends 400 years, working to make it even better, and then he comes back to the true present, which will have advanced like zero in the meantime, as King the Conqueror. Okay, in theory, there's nothing to prevent that from happening. That's one of the things the Gordian Protocol is going to be like. The Gordian Division is going to be like, we really need to keep an eye out for somebody doing that kind of shit, And you could actually argue that the Valkyrie Protocol is going to point them that way even more.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just saying.
It's like, okay, this could have been even worse. We should probably do something about this.
It's kind of like, oh gosh, talk about your near miss. Yeah. Well, one of the things also that is built into both 30th centuries, and this is something that I think is significant, and I hadn't really thought about them per se before we started the novels, is both of these societies had technological near misses where they did themselves grievous damage. And if it had gone just a little bit worse, they could have done themselves like total damage. And in the Valkyrie Protocol, we see an example of a universe that had a near miss that wasn't a miss, that took out both it and a daughter universe, kind of thing. And I think that concerns about industrial accidents on that scale are something that have always been a part of science fiction, but that the fact that science fiction is fundamentally an optimistic genre because it assumes there will be a future, even if there are problems with it. Okay, I mean, even a dystopian science fiction novel set in the 40th century, that's actually pretty optimistic when you think about it, because it means they figure we're going to be here for like another 2,000 years at least. But I think that, to me, one of the more interesting aspects of the two 30th centuries that we have here is the different nature of the near misses they had and the way they responded to it. Both of them responded in thoroughly understandable, reasonable directions, which mean that they really don't trust each other in the dark very much when they meet, because the experiences that drove them in these different directions created fundamentally different mindsets about certain aspects of technology.
Such as artificial
intelligence. Keep your stinking AIs where we can see them. What do you mean your president's an artificial intelligence?
What kind of lunatics are we dealing with here?
Weaponized nanotech. Are you guys crazy? So it was. That was to me a satisfying aspect of the book, and again, it's an area where I don't think that Jacob or I individually would have come up with what we came up with collectively. The reasons.
That's definitely true.
Yeah. Well, the reasons
for me, at least.
The reasons for me to do a collaboration are I won't do one unless I expect the collaboration to be at least as strong as either of us would have done alone. Okay. Unless the person that I'm looking at for my collaborator has strengths to bring to the table, hopefully strengths that I don't have, that we can interweave into the manuscript, or if I can learn or teach something in the process. And I've never done a collaboration that I didn't learn something from. It's not just a one-way street with, the wise old mentor sitting on top of the mountain, doing these two novels with Jacob has caused me to restructure some of the approaches that I am taking to ongoing projects, where the technology and so forth is concerned. I'm thinking I'm doing a collaboration with Richard Fox, which has it's been turned in now, and some of the things that I did in that, looking back, I can see were directly impacted by some of the stuff that we did in the Gordian Protocol.
Oh, cool.
Well, I mean, that's the way that it works. Okay. Writing is very individualistic It's very much an individual enterprise, just you and your keyboard, or in my case, the dragon, naturally speaking, kind of thing. On the one hand, when it can be done collaboratively, when you can actually pull someone else into it, and you can interact with them on that fundamental a level. As a shared experience, it's different from, but I think in a good collaboration, it's just as satisfying as doing it on your own. Eric once said, and I don't know that this was original to him, I just remember his formulation of it. He once pointed out that used to be, if you were going to do a collaboration, you had to at least live in the same town and hopefully in the same house, because you had to be able to push the manuscript back and forth, talk about it over the table, kind of thing. And before the internet, that meant physical contact. And I know that Steve White and I did our first novel together before the internet was up, okay? Certainly before the World Wide Web was up. I'm not sure where the U.S. military was at that point, but there were no ISPs. You couldn't, and so we were mailing chapters back and forth. And I discovered that it took 3 days for a chapter to get from Greenville to Charlottesville, Virginia, and 9 days for a chapter to get from Charlottesville, Virginia to Greenville. I don't know why, I suggested to Steve that it could be because, Charlottesville sucked. I don't know, something was in play there. And so we were doing individual chapters because you could mail those back and forth kind of thing. Okay, these days you can move the entire manuscript back and forth. You can move it back and forth with comments. You can send it to, Jacob can send one to me and says, David, what the hell were you doing here? Kind of thing. And I can send one to Jacob and say, Jacob, the math makes my head hurt, kind of thing. That you couldn't do before, and it helps. I think it makes collaborating easier. I think it probably makes it better. But when looking at what's involved in collaborating with someone, when I can send the manuscripts back and forth, just increases my already enormous respect for a writing team like Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. That they could produce the magnificent novels that they produced before they could email manuscripts back and forth, to me is just remarkable. To me, it's kind of like, I started writing using a Royal portable typewriter, okay? And that's like quill pen these days.
I've seen a typewriter once.
Oh, thank you, Jacob. Thank you. You're going to so pay for that. Roger Zelazny never stopped working on his portable typewriter to the day of his death. That was what he worked on. I think that if we hadn't lost him that summer, I might have converted him to a computer, because I went out that summer and I took my laptop with me. And Jane Linscold and I were talking in the kitchen, and she said, hey, look over there. And so here's Roger, and he starts out with the laptop in his lap, typing on it. And a little bit later I look, and he's on his knees, and he's got the typewriter on the hassock, the keyboard, and he's typing on it. And the next time I look at it, he's sitting there tailor fashion on the floor with the laptop in his lap, typing on it. And that's the way that he'd always worked with his portable typewriter. Mm-hmm. And the problem had been that he hadn't tried it with a laptop, so he didn't realize, that you could do that. But it's just amazing how it's another example of how the artifacts of our technology impact on how we produce and what we produce. And in a sense, that's kind of what these novels are about in a lot of ways. I mean, we're dealing with actual, at least in the case of Cisco, a genuine post-scarcity in a lot of ways, Syskov has kind of accomplished the singularity. The integration of electronic personalities into everything that's going on. And one of the problems is that admin is still in the position of making that transition. They're a little behind Syskov. And that's partly because their experience of the near miss, they kind of shot themselves in the foot in some ways, where avenues that Syskov has followed up were closed off by the admin's reaction to Yan Lu. I mean, Yan Lu was a bad experience, Yan Lu was kind of Skynet in Mandarin.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. And
just start dropping nukes until you wiped it all out.
And look, it's networked itself. I have to say, and this is totally off the topic of collaborations, but I have to say that one of the things that I really, really liked about the television series Person of Interest was that it was an intelligently written series that had great character development, but it was also one of the is technology a Pandora's box or not? And as part of, I think what we forget when we talk about Pandora's box is the last thing to come out of the box, which was hope in the original story. And I think that Pandora's box still has a lot of applicability to where we are today. And I think that in both of our 30th centuries, that's really in some ways what happened with their near miss. And we have probably now talked long enough to bore all of you to tears, especially one of us. So we probably need to wrap this up.
All right.
I'll just say that I could not be more pleased or more satisfied with where the Gordian Protocol and the Valkyrie Protocol came down. Unless, of course, there was one less universe blown up in it somewhere.
I'll record her next time.
Yeah. But
wow. This has been a tremendous experience for me, collaborating on these two novels, and also the work that we've already done on book 3 that I am super excited about. And I keep sending you emails. It's like, I'm still super excited about this one.
Well, he met the 87th precinct too.
Yeah.
That's another story. We won't go there.
But I've learned so much, and one of the things that as an engineer, I pretty much always said to myself is the day that I stop learning is the day that I stop being an engineer. And I have the same attitude about being an author.
I think you have to have that kind of attitude whatever you do if your vocation is also going to be your avocation. I think you do. But
lucky me.
Oh yeah, lucky you. You get to put up with me. I would say I would wrap this up by saying one more thing, which is I am reasonably competent that you are going to see solo Jacob Holo novels for a long time, and my prediction is that they are going to do well. And on that note, while Jacob's head still fits into his hat, we will say goodbye. Thanks for having us.
Goodbye.